Fans packed in, screams echoing throughout the arena. Elvis, at 40 years old, was still the icon, driving the crowd wild with his classic hits. He started with That's All Right, the song that first brought him to the public in 1954, evoking the era when rock and roll revolutionized American music. Next was Hound Dog, the 1956 hit that had everyone dancing like crazy. Then Burning Love from 1972, proving he still had the fire. The energy was surging, but then he shifted to a slower, more intimate part, the part where Elvis always made people feel like he was singing just for them. Now, in the middle of Can't Help Falling in Love, an immortal love song from the 1961 film Blue Hawaii, Elvis's voice was warm and close. Wise men say, only fools rush in. And then suddenly, a shout cut through the music, cutting through the noise of the crowd. That shout came from the third row, right in the center. It was Susan Jenkins, a desperate mother. She shouted with all her strength because she knew this was her last chance. But what was behind that shout? It was little Tommy Jenkins, only 8 years old, battling the cruel leukemia that had tormented him for 2 years. The doctors had predicted he wouldn't survive the night, with less than 48 hours left. A mystery begins. How could such a frail boy be there? And how would Elvis react? The boy's parents, Susan and Robert Jenkins, had made the heartbreaking decision to take their son out of the hospital to fulfill his final wish. That morning, Tommy whispered to his mother, "Mom, I want to see Elvis. Before I go to heaven, I want to hear him sing." Susan, with a shattered heart, tried to explain that Elvis concert tickets were the hardest thing in the world to get, especially on such short notice. But Robert, a simple mechanic who had never begged anyone in his life, spent the whole day calling every contact he knew. He called friends, colleagues, anyone who might help. By 6 p.m., just 2 hours before the show started, a friend of a friend who worked at the arena managed to get 3 tickets. Not VIP seats, just third row but off to the side, but enough to get them into the building where Elvis would perform. That was the first miracle. Folks, the miracle of a father's love. Tommy was so weak that Robert had to carry him from the car to their seats. He wore his favorite Elvis t-shirt, a bit loose on his gaunt frame, and a baseball cap to hide his hairless head from chemotherapy. During the first hour of the show, Tommy was like he was in heaven. Despite the pain racking him, despite the exhaustion, he sang along to every song, his tiny voice lost in the roar of the 21,000-person crowd. But the joy on his face was visible to anyone who looked. Susan kept checking his pulse, worried that the excitement might be too much for his weak heart. But Tommy, at 8 years old, was more alive than he had been in months. "This is the best day ever, Mom," he whispered during a break between songs. Susan wiped away tears, knowing this might be her son's last good day. When Elvis started Can't Help Falling in Love, Tommy's eyes lit up with pure joy. This was his favorite song, the one Susan sang to him every night before bed, the song that seemed to soothe the pain when everything else failed. Elvis was halfway through, with his intimate, conversational style that made everyone feel he was singing just for them. And then Susan's shout rang out again, cutting through everything. "Elvis, please, my son is dying. He loves you so much." Elvis stopped singing mid-verse. He looked confused for a moment, trying to locate the source of the shout. The band, unsure what was happening, gradually stopped playing. The arena with 21,000 people began to quiet down. Realizing something unusual was occurring, Susan shouted again, now standing up and holding Tommy in her arms. "Please, he only has a few hours left. He just wants to hear you sing." Silence enveloped the entire place. 21,000 pairs of eyes turned to the woman holding a clearly very sick child in the third row. Elvis set down the microphone, walked to the edge of the stage, squinting under the bright lights. "Ma'am," his voice came clearly through the sound system, carrying seriousness and concern. "What did you say?" Susan, tears streaming down her face, lifted Tommy higher so Elvis could see him clearly. This is my son, Tommy. He's 8 years old and dying. The doctors say only a few hours left. All he wanted was to see you perform. He loves you so much." The arena was so quiet, you could hear people's breathing. Elvis stood there, looking down at the tiny boy in the Elvis t-shirt, clearly very weak, pale skin, tired eyes, but full of hope. "What's your name, son?" Elvis called out loudly. Tommy, though weak, tried to speak loud enough for the mic to pick up. "Tommy Jenkins, I love you, Elvis." Those words, "I love you, Elvis," from an 8-year-old dying boy, hit Elvis's heart like a powerful punch. It was an emotional moment, folks, and what he did next was unprecedented in the history of rock and roll concerts. It was sensational, but full of seriousness and humanity. He turned to the band and said, "Guys, let's take a break." Then he turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need you all to be patient with me for a few minutes. There's something more important than this show happening right now." Elvis left the stage, leaving 21,000 people in stunned silence. Backstage, he acted with a decisiveness that surprised everyone in his entourage. "Joe," he said to Joe Esposito, his longtime tour manager, "bring that family backstage immediately." Joe hesitated. "Elvis, we can't stop the show for one—" Elvis interrupted, his voice firm but emotional. "That boy is dying. He came here to see me, and I'm damn sure going to give him more than just a view from the third row." Within minutes, security escorted the Jenkins family backstage. Tommy was now almost unconscious, but still alert enough to realize the miracle happening. In Elvis's dressing room, a beautiful but heartbreaking scene unfolded. Elvis sat down next to Tommy, who was now lying on the sofa because he was too weak to sit up. "Hey, Tommy," Elvis said gently, his voice warm like a father's, "your mom says you like my music a lot." Tommy nodded weakly. "I listen to Love Me Tender every night. It helps me not be scared anymore." Elvis felt his throat tighten. "You know what, kid? That's my favorite song, too. Do you want me to sing it just for you?" Tommy's eyes widened. Despite the pain, despite the fatigue, despite everything, he smiled. Elvis sat beside the sofa, and there, in the dressing room, no microphone, no stage lights, no audience except the dying boy and his parents, Elvis sang Love Me Tender better than ever in his career. 20 minutes later, Elvis returned to the stage, but not alone. He carried Tommy Jenkins in his arms. That image, the king of rock and roll holding a sick child, left the entire arena speechless. It was a mysterious and emotional moment. Folks, something sensational that no one forgot. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said into the mic, his voice thick with emotion, "I want to introduce my friend, Tommy Jenkins. Tommy is 8 years old, and he's fighting a battle no child should have to face. But you know what? Tommy is braver than any of us. And tonight, Tommy is going to help me finish this show." The arena erupted in applause, but not the usual wild screams. It was respectful, emotional applause, like when people witness something sacred. Elvis sat at the piano, placed Tommy on his lap, and began playing Love Me Tender again. Then the miracle happened. Tommy, though weak, started singing along. His small, fragile voice blended with Elvis's powerful, vibrant one, creating a beautiful but heartbreaking harmony. Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go. And as they sang, something even more miraculous happened in that arena. 21,000 people began singing along, but softly, respectfully, turning the song into a gentle lullaby for the dying boy. No one could hold back tears. Tough guys who came to see rock and roll were now crying like children. Teenagers sobbed, parents hugged their kids tighter, as if to protect them from life's cruelties. When the song ended, Elvis hugged Tommy tightly and whispered something only the boy could hear. Tommy smiled, a real smile that his parents hadn't seen in weeks. "Tommy," Elvis said into the mic, "you've made this show the most special one in my entire career. Thank you for being here with me tonight." As Elvis prepared to carry Tommy back to his parents, the boy did something unexpected that surprised everyone. He took off his baseball cap, the one hiding his bald head from chemo, and placed it on Elvis's head. "For you," Tommy whispered, "so you'll remember me." Elvis broke down, crying right on stage in front of 21,000 people. He, the strong man, now showing his vulnerability. He finished the show with Tommy's cap on his head, and every remaining song seemed dedicated to the boy now sitting in the front row, in his mother's arms. After the show, Elvis spent another hour with the Jenkins family in his dressing room. He signed photos, gave Tommy his iconic scarf, and promised to visit him in the hospital the next day. But this is the most sensational and mysterious part of the story. Folks, Tommy Jenkins didn't die that night, or the next day, or the following week. Something from that September 2nd night, perhaps the excitement, the love from 21,000 strangers, or the power of a dream come true, gave Tommy a strength that doctors couldn't yet explain. He lived another 6 months that medicine called impossible. Those 6 months were full of quality time with family, more Elvis concerts, and most importantly, 6 months without fear. After that night, Susan Jenkins later recounted, Tommy was no longer afraid of death. He knew he was loved, not just by his parents, but by Elvis and all those who sang with him. That brought him peace. When Tommy finally passed away in March 1976, he was wearing the scarf that the king of rock and roll had given him on that magical September night. The experience with Tommy changed Elvis profoundly. From that night on, he began paying more attention to connecting with sick children at his concerts. Not always as dramatic as with Tommy, but he looked at his audience differently, with more seriousness about his mission. Elvis was never the same after meeting Tommy. Charlie Hodge, his longtime friend and guitarist, said, "That boy reminded Elvis of the real reason he was on stage, not just to entertain, but to touch people's lives." Elvis kept Tommy's baseball cap for the rest of his life. It was found in his bedroom at Graceland after he passed away, along with dozens of letters from the Jenkins family and photos from that night. The concert where Elvis stopped the show for Tommy became legendary in the Elvis fan community. Bootleg recordings from that night are treasured artifacts, not for the music, but for the humanity they capture. A perfect blend of emotion, seriousness, and a touch of mystery. In 1982, the Tommy Jenkins Foundation was established by Susan and Robert to fulfill final wishes for seriously ill children. The foundation's motto is taken from Elvis's words, "Is there something more important than the show?" To date, the foundation has granted over 10,000 wishes, many of them involving meeting favorite artists. The story of Elvis and Tommy reminds us that the most important moments in life happen when we pause and pay attention to what really matters. Elvis could have ignored Susan's plea. He could have finished the song, ended the show, and gone home. After all, he had 21,000 other fans to please. Instead, he chose compassion over convention. He chose human connection over professional obligation. He chose to be Elvis the man instead of Elvis the performer, and in doing so, he gave an 8-year-old dying boy 6 more months of life, 21,000 people an unforgettable memory, and all of us a lesson that fame is meaningless if not used to help others. Today, there's a small plaque backstage at the FedEx Forum in Memphis, which replaced the Mid-South Coliseum, reading, "In memory of Tommy Jenkins and all children who remind us what truly matters." Every artist who performs there sees the plaque, and many ask about the story behind it. When they hear it, they change their approach to performing. Because the story of that September night reminds everyone that we don't know who's in the audience. We don't know who needs a moment of magic, a bit of hope, or just to know someone cares. Elvis stopped the show for Tommy Jenkins. But really, Tommy saved Elvis's show by reminding him and us what performing truly is. Not the bright lights, the screams, or the applause, but the connection between people, using talent to brighten someone's life, and sometimes, if we're lucky, giving a dying boy the strength to live 6 more months by showing him he's loved by 21,000 strangers and the king of rock and roll. Now, let me share my personal analysis and perspective. Folks, as a music blogger who's followed Elvis from the early days, I see this story not just as a one-time act of kindness. It's proof of the power of music as an emotional bridge. In the era of 1975, when America had just gone through Watergate and the end of the Vietnam War, people needed hope. Elvis, through this action, brought that hope. From a historical viewpoint, this was the moment Elvis rediscovered himself amid his personal issues, declining health, addiction. But that night, he was reborn, personally, at an age like yours. I cried when I first researched this story, because it touches the deepest part, the part that realizes life is short, and small actions can create big legacies. Think about it, Elvis at his peak, but choosing an unknown boy. That speaks to his character, generous, sincere. Tommy, at 8, represents innocence and courage, teaching us about hope. In today's society, when children still face illnesses, we need more Elvises, people who stop their show of life to help. Let's analyze the peak moment. When Elvis carried Tommy on stage, it was the perfect blend of art and humanity. It had mystery. Who expected a rock concert to become a prayer? Seriousness from Tommy's illness, emotion from the crowd's tears, and light sensationalism from the 6-month miracle. From a psychological angle, this event might have triggered a placebo effect in Tommy, where hope extended life. Science now proves that, but to me, it's the power of spirit, a real miracle. The change in Elvis afterward is noteworthy. He started paying attention to sick kids, visiting hospitals, sending gifts. Charlie Hodge said Elvis often mentioned Tommy, and the cap was like a talisman reminding him of purpose. This shows even stars can learn from children. About the Jenkins Foundation, it's a spreading legacy. From one night to an organization helping thousands. It proves one action can create waves. In my commentary, this is an example against today's celeb culture, where everything is PR. Elvis was genuine, no cameras needed. Personal perspective added, I remember watching Elvis concerts on TV in the 70s. He was larger than life, but this story made him close like a friend. At our age, folks, we've seen loss, wars, illnesses, but we've also seen kindness change everything. This story challenges, if it were you, would you stop your work to help a stranger? For me, the answer is yes, because legacy is those moments. Let's dive deeper into the context. 1975, Elvis was tired from endless tours, but Memphis was home, making the story personal. Tommy represented the working class, his dad a mechanic, mom a homemaker, Elvis's true fan. From the start, the moment Susan shouted, that was the dramatic peak. Creating mystery, Elvis reacted by stopping, showing his generous nature. He once gave cars to strangers. Backstage, singing privately, no lights, just sincerity. I imagine his voice trembling, eyes moist. That was when Elvis rediscovered the joy of music. On stage, singing together, Tommy's small voice with Elvis's, creating surging emotion. The crowd singing along, community unity, Elvis crying when receiving the cap, breaking the tough image, showing vulnerability. The extra 6 months, medical mystery, perhaps adrenaline boosted immunity. To me, it's collective love. Tommy had 6 months without fear, the greatest gift. When he passed, wearing the scarf, full circle, Elvis kept the cap, memento, bootleg recordings, emotional treasures. The foundation helps kids meet singers like Tommy. The plaque reminds today's artists, compared to modern artists, who would stop a show? Few, due to schedules. Mystery of the miracle. How does hope change biology? Seriousness. Leukemia in the 70s. Low survival rates. Emotion. Crowd tears. Unity. Light sensationalism. Elvis saves boy with music. In conclusion, the story is eternal. Teaching to pause, listen, act. Folks, tell it to your grandkids. If the story touches you, like, subscribe, comment similar moments. Thanks for listening. Stay healthy. And now, let's dig even deeper into the meaning of this story. As older folks, you and I know life is full of surprises, moments we can't foresee. The story of Elvis and Tommy isn't just an old tale from 1975, but a vivid reminder of the power of compassion. Imagine if Elvis hadn't stopped, if he'd kept singing without noticing the cry from the stands. What would have happened? Tommy might have passed without those precious 6 months, and Elvis might never have found a deeper purpose in his career. That's the mystery of life. One small action can change many fates. From an emotional viewpoint, the moment 21,000 people sang "Love Me Tender" like a lullaby gives me chills every time I think of it. It wasn't just music, but human solidarity in the face of pain. In today's divided world, this story brings hope that kindness still exists. I often wonder, if I were there, would I sing along? Definitely, because everyone has a heart. And that moment touched every heart. Let's talk about the sensationalism of the medical miracle. Doctors couldn't explain why Tommy lived another 6 months. Maybe adrenaline from the excitement, maybe the power of love from the crowd, or maybe a real miracle from Elvis's music. In my analysis, this is proof that spirit can affect the body. Modern science talks about the placebo effect, but to me, it's the power of hope. Tommy, the 8-year-old boy, taught us never to give up hope, no matter how bad things are. Now, let's talk about Elvis's legacy. He wasn't just the king of rock and roll with immortal hits, but a man with a heart of gold. After that night, Elvis changed. He started paying more attention to sick fans, sending gifts, visiting hospitals. Charlie Hodge said Elvis would look at Tommy's cap and tear up. That's the mysterious part. A boy saved a star. In today's society, we need stories like this to remind that fame should be used to help, not just make money. About the Tommy Jenkins Foundation, it has helped over 10,000 children. Each wish is another Tommy, a dream come true. The motto, "Is there something more important than the show?" is a reminder for every artist. In my personal commentary, this is how the story lives on. Susan and Robert turned pain into hope for others. That's a serious lesson on the power of resilience. My personal perspective, as an older person, I've witnessed much loss, but this story brings warmth. It makes me think about moments I could have paused to help someone. We have a responsibility to share these lessons with the younger generation. Tell your grandkids about Elvis and Tommy so they learn about compassion. Let's analyze more about the historical context. 1975 was the post-Vietnam War era. Americans were weary of politics. Elvis, through this action, became a symbol of hope. That's why the story became legendary. Elvis fans still pass around bootleg recordings of that night, not for the music, but for the emotion. The moment Susan shouted in desperation, full of mystery, Elvis stopping the show, sensational. He could have been criticized, but he chose humanity. That's the seriousness of the decision. Backstage, singing privately for Tommy, emotional peak. Elvis's voice trembling, Tommy smiling weakly. I envision it like a movie, but it was real. On stage, carrying Tommy, iconic image, 21,000 people witnessing a miracle. When Tommy gave the cap, Elvis cried, breaking point. He, the star, became an ordinary human. The extra 6 months, medical mystery. Perhaps love is the cure. Tommy passed with the scarf, emotional closure. Elvis kept the cap, symbol of change. The foundation, lasting impact. The plaque at FedEx Forum, reminder for artists. Compared today, artists like Taylor Swift might stop a show? Maybe, but Elvis was the pioneer. Mystery. How does hope influence biology? Seriousness. Childhood illness still a problem today. Emotion. Crowd unity. Sensational. Elvis saves boy's life. The story teaches us to pause, listen, act. Share if you have similar moments. Thanks. Subscribe for more touching stories. And to expand, think about how music heals. Elvis didn't know, but his voice gave Tommy strength. In life, We can be Elvis to someone, a word, a gesture. That's the profound lesson. I recall a similar story, but not as sensational. A singer stopped a show for a sick fan, but Elvis was the original, in analysis. This story influenced pop culture. Many films, books inspired by it. Personally, it made me love Elvis more, not just his music, but the man. Folks, at our age, live with compassion. That's the key to happiness. Have a good day.